But thank you all so much for joining us. Author Lindy Ryan will discuss her new horror novel, Another Fine Mess, in conversation with author Katrina Moore in this installment of Author Hour in Massachusetts. I said Moore, I meant Monroe. I've had the hardest time with your last name, Katrina, and I
Common
don't know why.
mistake.
Common mistake. So, a little bit about Katrina. Katrina Monroe is the author of They Drown Our Daughters, Graveyard of Lost Children, and Through the Midnight Door. A private investigator by day, she lives in Minnesota with her wife, two children, and Eddie, the ghost who haunts their bedroom closets. And Lindy Ryan is an award-winning author, anthologist, and short film director, declared a champion for women's voices in horror by Shelf Awareness. Lindy was named a Publisher Weekly Star Watch honoree back in 2020, and in 2022 was named one of horror's most masterful anthology curators. Born and raised in Southeast Texas, Lindy currently resides in North Carolina. She's the current author in residence at Rue Morgue and a professor at Rutgers University. Her cozy paranormal mystery, Bless Your Heart, was named a best horror novel of 2024 by Esquire and Betches, and she follows it up now with the sequel, Another Fine Mess. So I apologize for any mispronunciations there. And so, folks, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Lindy and Katrina for joining us here tonight. And Katrina, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me, Lindy. It's so cool to finally put a face and a voice to the many, many emails.
So
So,
many emails. Yeah. No, it's wonderful. You're one of my personal favorite authors. So thank you for
uh,
joining me.
thanks. Of course, I love doing this. So I know I kind of gave you my questions ahead of time, but I'm going to start like in the middle, only because number one, that is an incredibly full, robust, impressive bio. And the one thing I did not know, short film director, can you kind of address that a little bit? Because that is so cool.
I did one short film, so it's maybe not fair to go in the bio, but I did a children's book called Trick or Treat, Alistair Gray, and then we adapted it into a 9-minute animated children's short, all about Halloween, celebrating Halloween. I wrote it originally for my son when he was about 5, so it went from a little something I told my kid before Halloween to get him amped up to a picture book to a short film, and then we did the festival circuit and we're lucky enough to win several awards and that sort of thing. A lot of fun, and a lot of fun to make your children's story come to life. Was especially exciting. So
That is very cool. So definitely worth putting in the bio though. The awards are impressive. That is very cool. So to kind of like keep on that topic a little bit with all of these hats you wear, you've got short film director, author, editor, professor, all of these things that you do. How did these skills sort of overlap in your literary life?
I all the time. I mean, it's just one big giant hat, I think, really. Because when you're writing, you're editing and you're putting things together. So, and I teach writing, I teach creative writing students and storytelling. So they all kind of work together. But sometimes I have to focus a little bit more on my own story or focus on a theme like in an anthology, which we've gotten to do a few together. And so the skill set of this storytelling and telling memorable, engaging stories that, have some staying power with our emotions and how we feel about characters. I think it all derives from the same hat, but definitely is a lot of juggling, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. I can see that. So do they, do your skill sets or your different roles kind of butt heads a little bit sometimes, or does it all kind of cohesively mesh?
No, it never cohesively meshes. Are you kidding
I
me?
guess that was generous.
Thank you, thank you. I think like I'm never happy with anything. I'm constantly editing and re-editing and re-editing. I finally today turned in a new novel on the a copy edit round that took me 6 hours, 6 rounds to get through because you're constantly tweaking and poking. Um, and being super harshly overcritical of my own work. So, we just do the best we can and keep
Yeah,
going.
yeah. No, I feel that. I feel that deeply. So let's go ahead and dive in then to the reason why we're all here, Another Fine Mess, and then the prequel to that, Bless Your Heart, two incredible novels. And I don't even mean that with any hyperbole. I really, really enjoyed these two books. I love when you can kind of cross genre a little bit. I like the humor and I like the horror and I like the heart that's in these books. Um, but in both of these books, and I guess in subsequence, we are brought back to the 90s. So what is it about the 90s that made it the perfect spot to bring the Evans women to life?
Because it's the 90s, right? Is there any time better in our collective history than the late 90s? No, I mean, I think for me, I certainly am a 90s girl through and through. I came up in the 90s. I grew up on Goosebumps, one of those kids
Yep.
for sure.
Yep.
And then since, the Evans women are all heavily inspired by my actual mother and grandmothers, they were all still with us in the 90s. So for me, it was a little bit like going home and spending time with family members who aren't there anymore. And some of the best years we had together, which was, kind of like my high school years. So it just
Yeah.
felt like the right time. My best memories are from those times with my grandmothers, and that's what I wanted to share some of that with them again in these books.
And I think that's kind of obvious when you're reading Luna as well. You can tell that you have a special bond with Luna. So I
Yeah,
I'm
Luna
sorry.
is
I'm
a little bit like
fangirling
me
quite a bit
bleeding
right
over.
now, so I'm having a hard time. But so let's talk about Luna a little bit. Is she how much of her character is biographical or autobiographical, I should say?
Oh, all of it, right? Which was beat for beat. But honestly, a fair amount.
Monsters included?
Monsters included for sure. It's I went to that high school. I went with those kids. I mean, I went with that was my hometown. That was my school. And so Luna's very much kind of a fictionalized version of teenage Lindy, I think. All the sass and spitfire. I definitely had it 15, 16 years old is here for Luna to enjoy. I think Luna's a little bit braver than I am. I was notoriously a chicken. My mom used to play
No.
pranks on me all the time about our house being haunted, and she got me more often than not. So this is all payback for what my mom did to me in high school. But I think when you're looking to write authentic characters, drawing from people around you or people who inspire you helps bring that realness. And I have no problems at all poking fun at myself. So I think that just made Luna, kind of come to life on the page.
Along with that, has anyone in your life sort of recognized themselves in these
Oh,
books or people they know?
100%. When Bless Your Heart came out, the amount of people from high school that I have not seen since high school who reached out to me was kind of hilarious. I mean, the characters in the world aren't based on any one specific person outside of my grandmother's, but they're kind of these amalgamations of things that happened to our friend group or things that happened in our social circles. So I'll have friends or old peers reach out to me thinking they know exactly who I was, channeling when I was writing certain things. And, a lot of times they're right because we all went to the same little tiny high school together. So, yeah, they definitely come back, but it's really fun to reconnect with some of my old life as, Bless Your Heart and Another Fine Mess go out into the world too. So it's a lot of fun.
That is cool. So then I'm going to poke the bear a little bit here. I don't know if you'll even answer this question. So are any of the victims based on people from your past that you maybe wanted to not be nice to?
No.
So yes, excellent.
Not.
Cool. Perfect.
Of course not,
I won't ask
Katrina.
names. I won't ask names, but I just had to know.
No, I mean, they're really. I'm trying to think of who all of my victims are between both books, and I think I think writing is therapy, right? And so sometimes you just got to exercise your demons out onto the page, and but no one, truly no one specifically. I love everyone, all my friends and family from my hometown, of course.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with the writing as therapy. I have recently started calling my three horror releases my triangle of trauma. So it all three books address issues that I am to this day dealing with. So yeah, no, I totally get it. So then I also want to know, was there a creepy, sweet goth boy in your past? Is he still here?
Do you mean my Crane?
Yes.
Crane is such a fun character because Crane was 100% inspired by one of my closest teenage best friends, not a romantic interest, not a boyfriend, but just we used to call him the king of the goths in high school. So,
Nice.
and we're still friends today. So there was times when I was writing Bless Your Heart, what I'd call him, and I'm like, imagine I just told you this. What's your response? And he would write it, and I'm just down here taking notes and like seeing, what's some weird, like intolerably goth thing to say to me when I mentioned, like Peter Steele, he's a
Yeah.
giant among men. I'm like, perfect, going in the book because he was a giant. I mean, he was about 7 feet tall. So,
Yeah.
so Crane is definitely still a part of my life. Very, very good friend of mine from high school, and still very Crane-ish. So it's fun to, kind of hang out, not just with my high school self, but with my high school besties. So
That is very cool. I like that you can revisit that time in and have warm fuzzy feelings about it. I myself did not enjoy high school even a little bit. So I have a feeling that if my high school experience were to become a horror novel, it would be something like, I don't know, Carrie meets Cujo or something. It would not be fun. It would be
oh,
horrifying.
well, there's your next project, Katrina. We'll add that to the quadrant of terror or of
Yes, yes,
trauma
yes.
quadrant.
Yeah. Quadrangle? Is that
Quadromal, I don't know. No, I'm into
I
it. I
don't
mean, high school was hard. I grew up in a very small conservative southern Texan town in the late 90s. The world was changing in the late 90s. There were so many things that happened, big, huge, terrible
know.
things that happened in the late 90s, and we're in this little vacuum bubble, right on the border between Texas and Louisiana. So things, you felt the ripple effects very like, under your skin there. So I had friends in high school who defied the norms of Southern small town life. And, it wasn't a great time, truly, for many of my peers. I mean, I had several friends who did not make it through high school for various reasons. And so, there are things I talk about in Bless Your Heart and Another Fine Mess, that I kind of poke at because these things were, these were real experiences of people. And people ask, why do you write a character who's this or who's that? Like, because those are real people who really live in these towns, who really went through these experiences. And, the
Yeah.
monsters of Bless Your Heart, the literal monsters aren't necessarily the worst monsters in the story. When you kind of consider the impacts and consequences to the real people living there. So,
Yeah.
and I thought that was an important thing about the late 90s to bring into the story too.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of a baseline to good horror too, in my opinion, is a story that features, these mythical creatures or fantastical monsters, but they're not always the worst thing on the page. Good horror, I think, shows us that people tend to be the true horrors in our lives. So
Right, the absolute worst monsters, right? So,
yeah, yeah, for sure. So coming back to the 90s a little bit, I personally clocked two very obvious 90s references that I was very excited by. The first was I'm going to try and do this without being spoilery. There is a scene that I know I've scolded you
I
about
think I
before.
know which one.
Yes, there is a very particular scene that may or may not have been in a silly little ghost movie that made me cry quite a bit. Um, it's very traumatic. It felt a little bit like a wink and a slap in the book, which was very cool. And I also clocked something that was a little bit practical magic. So are there any other kind of Easter egg things we should be on the lookout for from the 90s?
Well, yes. I think there's so many. I don't even remember all of them that are there. And that silly little ghost movie was super intentional. Right? I think that changed all like collectively our lives when we were like 12, 13 years old with that when that came out. It definitely changed my like weird little like gothic romance heart. But I think I drew so much inspiration from there's music that's referenced in the books. There's the social stuff that I talked about, but there's a lot of film, television references that are kind of baked in, and because a lot of them were also happening at the time. The late 90s, again, heyday for for spooky stuff. The practical
Mhm.
magic reference is the one that always catches me by surprise because practical magic, I'm sure like many people, is one of my top 5 favorite movies of
Oh
all
yeah, for
time, or
sure.
in
For
top 5
sure.
favorite book series. Like I just absolutely adore the Owens women, almost as much as I adore the Evans women, which is kind of funny when I hear myself say it out
I
loud.
know. It's like, wait a minute.
It's like, wait, wait, I don't know. In grew up with the movie. We grew up having midnight margaritas. We still have midnight margaritas. My grandfather was a gardener, so he grew roses. So we had roses everywhere. I mean, there was just a lot of things in my life that somehow were very similar to, that story. So when I hear that reference, it always kind of throws me for a loop. And then I think, oh, yeah, that totally exists. And I'm totally here for it because it's such a wonderful project. And I love that people find that connective tissue, that are those meaningful, nostalgic things for them, for the readers, that bubble back to the surface and even take the author by surprise. I think it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, they're all really great. And I call them spoilers. Only one of them really is, but I have shoved this book in more than one pair of hands just so they can get to the scene so I can cry with them over it. It's really, really great.
You want to know, actually kind of a funny story was when I was writing, I knew this was coming. Yeah. And I remember telling my editor, I'm going to do this. And she was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Don't, we're going to make it fine. I promise. And so I did it. But, I have a treadmill in my living room and I'll just put on some of my favorite scenes or favorite movies and I'll just walk and walk and walk. And I think the few things that I was really trying to kind of like absorb into my skin before I wrote the climax to Another Fine Mess, I probably watched that scene 15, 20 times just so I could, so I'm walking on the treadmill, to get my steps in my living room because, why not? Just bawling constantly and just crying. And I was like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, this is part of my process. I need to feel it. I need to be in there. Otherwise, I don't think I can write it the way I want it to come out. So I have watched childhood favorites pretty heavily over the past, 4 years while I've been working on this series so far.
That is very cool. I love that. Also, on the kind of flip side of that, I'm curious to know if there are any other references that maybe didn't make the cut or scenes that kind of got axed because maybe they were too on the nose or they just didn't mesh.
Yeah, no, not really. I think I'm so slow when I'm writing with that I want to make sure everything is right and everything is kind of where it needs to be when it needs to be there. And then I rewrite it 37 times before I'll call it a rough draft after 37 times. But, no, I think I had a very strong idea of where the first book was going. And by the time I got to the second book, the Evans women were like, no, this is what we're doing now. So some of that happened, but not, my preconceived ideas. I try to keep them pretty low anyway. Otherwise, I feel like I'm going to try to force something or write something that's not authentic. So I try not to hold myself to expectations, but I do keep a running list of weird ideas or like a line of dialogue. I really want Ducey to say she's my dialogue diva.
She's got some really good one-liners.
She's got some great one-liners. So I keep those kinds of things going, but I can't think of anything that didn't make the cut.
That reminds me then, something I have scribbled on the bottom of my page because it came to me in the shower yesterday. The butterscotch, where did that come from? Like, what is that?
The sinking butterscotch. So my Ducey, my great grandmother, we usually called her Dew if we didn't get the whole Ducey out, but that was in fact her nickname was Ducey.
Nice.
She was the kind of gal who had her pockets loaded down with Werther's Originals at all times. So whether it was, she would wear these like apron things, apron or her pocketbook or her slacks pockets, whatever she was wearing, you can guarantee you're going to find two things: butterscotch candy and pennies for scratch offs. So she had these two things always. And while I never really got on board with the scratch off thing, very much a butterscotch girl. Like I too have Werther's Originals living all over the place. So that was just life. Like that wasn't even something that I had to think about to give her character. It was, my Ducey always had butterscotch. My Nana always had clock keys. She always was winding the clocks, always winding the clocks. None of them were on the same time. They went off when they wanted to. It was complete madness in the house because my grandparents were clock collectors. So these were just things that I wanted to bring about those real women into the story. So butterscotches, unfortunately, are a truth. So
you know what, I'm into it. And I think it is so cool. No wonder you became a writer or a literary individual with actual characters walking around in your life, just character women that are completely unapologetically themselves, unusual, super fun. That is amazing. I love that. And one of the things that I really love about these books is that they are part love letter to, your past, to the 90s, to how you grew up, to your grandmothers. It's also humorous. There's a lot of really cutting one-liners in this, like we just said. The characters are loud, sometimes obnoxious, super fun to read about, but it's also really gruesome in some ways. And these scenes that are featuring, okay, you need to pronounce the type of monster that it is because I will butcher it.
Oh, I don't want to. I want to have some fun here tonight too, Katrina.
Okay, so Strigoi? Is that
you
right?
got it. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I've got some Eastern European in me. I reach back to the ancestors.
Just pull it. Yeah. Reach
Yes.
to the ancestors to help that slide right out.
Help me, Polish grandparents, please. So what exactly are they? They seem kind of vampire types, but they're not really.
So Strigoi are an Eastern or Romanian mythology that predates kind of what we think of as modern vampires. They were, in fact, where Bram Stoker took his inspiration for Dracula. So they predate kind of our modern vampire, and I use the modern kind of loosely because we're like 200 plus years into the Dracula style vampires. But Strigoi are kind of if we bring them into the current timeline, they're a little bit of a mix between a vampire and a zombie, really. So these are, spirits that rise from the grave, hungry, and feed. And as they feed, they go stronger, but they're not necessarily, the gonna fang the neck. I mean, if that's where they get you, cool. If not, also cool. Like they're just, they're just hungry. So they're not picky. They just want blood. They want life. They want soul. They want, filling. So, the old mythology, it's fun because it branches off, and I was able to keep it going into the second book with kind of the predecessor of the modern werewolf, is the Pricolici, that we get into in Another Fine Mess. So they're very vampiric. They, depending on what your myth of choice is, going to help define what they look like. But they're really just ghouls, as Juicy calls them. They're the risen dead, and they rise with hunger. The calling and knocking thing, which I'm realizing I'm doing backwards. So knocking is like this, and then calling, that's part of the mythology. So I tried. Now I'm a professor, so I'm an academic by heart. I love finding weird, true stuff to write about, and I knew what kind of monster, what kind of lore I wanted in this series, but I also knew that I wanted to do something different than every other, kind of vampire series out there. So I just went farther back. Two birds thing. I got to do some really fun research and learn something new and get to talk about it and write, a different type of creature. But yeah, they're pretty grisly. These boy.
Yeah, no, they are. They are these, the thing. I can't. Thinking about these scenes kind of turns my stomach a little bit. Was that kind of what you were aiming for? Like you wanted to go for the really gruesome, or was that just kind of like a byproduct?
No, I don't even think they're that grisly myself. I think I have been desensitized by too many zombie movies in my life or something, because I write them and I'm just watching it happen, in my brain. I'm a very visual thinker. And then I sit back, but I listened to the Bless Your Heart audiobook I do a lot of road trips. I do a lot of book events, and I was listening to the audiobook, kind of getting ready to think about what comes next in the series. And there was a couple of scenes I was like, oh my,
I
Lindy, what is wrong with you? But I try to throw some cheek in there. I write this gruesome, grisly thing, and then I slap a joke on it, just to put it in there and try to bring some levity back up, because I'm not trying to write grisly scenes, but they're part and parcel to the story. And I think you need those consequences. You need, those dangers to really appreciate, the wins and the heartfelt parts. So I like all about balance, right? Everything in moderation.
Yeah. And that's something I definitely appreciated about these books, because you can be a horror author and still be a horror weenie like I am. I am not good with the gruesome stuff. I am not good with the gore, blood. No, thank you. I will pass out. I don't like it. My brand of horror is more of the cerebral, creepy, what is that knocking sound? Because I can handle that. So that is what I deliver.
I am the same way. It's really kind of silly because I don't like bloody, gutty stuff. I mean, we're watching Black Sails right now. If anyone's ever seen it, fantastic historical show blending Treasure Island and real golden age of piracy stuff. And there was some executions that were just like horrific, like nightmare inducing for me. And then I'm writing about like people's tongues being found, and I'm like, what's the big deal? I don't understand. So I think there's like this level of disconnect in my brain, but I can't watch a scary movie, but I'll watch a horror comedy and just giggle my brains out when there's like big, silly blood splatters or something because it's so
Yeah.
over the top and so silly. It's not really trying to scare you as much as it is kind of like shock you back into the story. So that's what
Oh
I'm
yeah.
going for. But
Yeah, I didn't really think about that. And I think the joke at the end kind of helps that too. It gives you a little bit of a okay, and you can move along with the story and jump back into the heart of it, which is, it's really skillfully done. That is cool. So I want to talk a little bit about the Evanses themselves. Underneath all of the gore and the horror, I say underneath the gore and the horror, there's a kind of this is our problem refrain that the Evanses keep coming up with. How much of that, if any at all, is a kind of call out to the put upon women of the world who are just kind of taking on the duties of care, tending to the children, to their neighbors, to their grandparents, to whoever needs them without any acknowledgement or reward.
when you sent me your questions, because I am one of the people who prepares. See, I have them. I remember reading that. I thought that question and I was like, oh, that's a really good question because honestly, I don't think it's something I've consciously thought of as I was writing, but it's something I'm very aware of in the context of these women and their jobs and their stories. And then, I unfortunately do occasionally like watch the news, so like we see these things. So I don't think it was super intentional, but maybe it was completely intentional. It's one of those things that you just
Yeah.
do as an artist that comes out of you and you don't really realize you've done it until you've done it, and then you think, good, this is a message I wanted to talk about, this is what I want women or anyone reading this story to take away. As it happens, because I'm such a researcher, as I've been writing these stories and writing these women, I have done so much incredible amounts of research, not just on like the mythology and the strigoi, but also on funeral processes. And, how does embalming work? And how do you do makeup on a cadaver? And, what is the process of all these things? And then I went to a mortuary supply store online because I have a problem with method. And I bought myself a trocar. I bought myself a couple other things because I want to make sure I know what they look like, how to use them. And so I got really obsessed with a woman named Caitlin Dowdy, who runs, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget the name of her, but she's a funeral director.
Oh
And
yeah,
a
I've read
mortician.
her. She the smoke gets in your eyes.
Smoke at Your Eyes and Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs, and
Yeah,
a
no,
number of
she's
other books. I
amazing.
think it's like
Yeah, yeah,
The Good Death Project. I can't think, but she
yeah, yeah,
brings
yeah.
awareness to, the funeral business. And so I got really hooked on her channel, her books, everything. I'm a complete fan. She doesn't know that I am just like over the moon for her.
Same.
But I learned so much, and I learned so much of the history of the funeral business. And just like women have always shepherded in new life as midwives, we've shepherded out life on the other end of that, whether it's a funeral process or, today we call them death doulas, um, and to sit and prepare people for, what's this great next big adventure that's coming and their families, and get ready. And so I found it to be just absolutely fascinating, the real history and how far we've gotten away from, the love that we used to get these practices. Like funerals are big business, but what they really are should
Yes.
be are, very emotional, dignified processes. So I really enjoyed bringing that into the story, bringing that realism. And, if, you're reading it and you're seeing that put uponness, it's like, that's fantastic. I love that that's a takeaway because I think it's a very strong message throughout, even if it wasn't, super intentional.
Yeah. Well, see, now we have a little bit of a problem because you have touched on one of my very, very deep niche interests. I have also done a deep dive into the history of funeral practices for a project. I have a very little known self-published novel called A Tale de Mort, and it is about a funeral director. And so I did the same. I went to a funeral home, crematory to just kind of talk through the process. I got to see the room, I got to see all the tools and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the one thing I remember very vividly is she showed me this bottle and she goes, "This is something we call chemical purple Jesus." And I said, "Okay, do tell me more."
That's right.
And it
No
is
more.
it is essentially the thing that they use whenever they embalm and people turn green because they are jaundice, and they use the chemical purple Jesus to counteract that.
Yes. It's isn't it fascinating? Like this, I mean,
Yes.
the Evans women don't embalm. It would be problematic for the whole story
Yeah.
if they did. But they don't embalm. So I know very little about embalming specifically, but the science and the artistry that goes
Yes.
into processing a cadaver for burial, however you're doing it, the makeup is different, the products you use are different. And I think it's fascinating if you detach yourself from this idea of death being gross and disgusting and sad and morbid, and you just look at it as a natural process that each and every single one of us will experience, will go through, watch our loved ones, experience and go through, and look for, I don't want to say the bright side because we're not bright siding this here.
No.
But look for the beauty in the process, or look for the fulfillment and the dignity. There's just so many incredible things. And when my Nana passed away, she passed away in 2014. The beautician for the funeral didn't show.
Oh
So,
no.
so, my mother, who, like Grace Evans, like previously sold Mary Kay. I mean, we're talking like 80s, 90s stuff here, right? So it was
Perfect.
previously of the
Perfect.
Mary Kay Avon community. Knows a good bit about makeup, and so we had to prepare my grandmother for her reception and for her burial ourselves. So it's like the weirdest thing in the world to have hands-on experience with.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I mean, it was a magical experience. I got to spend some time with my grandmother in this very intimate and loving way that most people don't get and don't want, and that's completely fair.
Yeah.
But I loved it because I was not there when she passed. I was in a different state and couldn't get home in time. So this was my way of honoring her. And I love that Grace and the other Evans women kind of see the honor and their respect and the care that they put into their clients. They're not just farming them through. So
Yeah.
purple
Yeah.
Jesus juice
Yeah.
aside, there's a lot of
For
like
sure.
really
Yeah.
interesting
Yeah.
things that go on back there for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and it really does come through in the books. You can tell even based on their duty of putting down these ghouls. It's death is not something to be, feared. It's not something, to turn your nose up at. It's people die. And that's okay. And then these ghouls that, rise from the dead are wrong and they need to be put down again. So it really
Right.
does come
Yeah.
through. So I kind of want to, in the next few minutes we have, do some craft questions a little bit. My One of my favorite questions to ask are the positive ones. So I want to know what skill in your writerly arsenal is your best. Which one are you like, yep, I got it.
Oh gosh. I don't know.
She's like,
Um
I hate them all. What do you
I
mean?
hate them all. They're all the worst. Um I don't know. It definitely depends on the day. I mean, I would have said like I'm pretty good at self-editing and being aware of like where I've gone off the rails, but I did just finish copy edits on a new book and clearly that's a lie. So like I think yeah, I don't know. I mean I think I don't know. Yeah, I got nothing. Sorry.
Cool. Okay, no, that's fine. Let's be negative. So let's so then what cop talking about copy edits then, what is maybe one that it's the same mistake you will always make forever and ever, amen, no matter how many times someone corrects you?
I make the most ridiculous typos of any author. I've edited lots of books doing anthologies. And so I get to work with some of the most amazing authors out there, people like brilliant, wonderful writers. And I can spot a typo from a mile away. And yet in my work, the most ridiculous things come through. And anything that has two O's, forget it. I never spell it right.
No, who needs
Spent
to?
versus spend, my tenses, I goof them all the time. So
Hmm.
I tend to write what I'm thinking. I'll be like talking to my dog or, my partner or something, and I'll just write something ridiculous like, what are we having for dinner tonight? I don't know, chicken soup. And it goes in the sentence, and I don't see it until 5 or 6 rounds of edits later. So, it's always good for a laugh. There was a funny, really bizarre reference inside Bless Your Heart where I wrote gumbo for no reason, absolutely no reason. It's just living in the middle of a sentence. So, I like to think I leave myself treats to come back to when I'm in editing. So I tell my editors, I'm like, have fun. See what I left you. But as a writer, you're writing, you're thinking, you're creating, you're editing, you're getting new inspiration, and you have to kind of put these things together. And sometimes something goofy slips through the cracks. Maybe gumbo. So
I mean, who doesn't like gumbo? I want to say. I'm really hungry. If you can't tell, even after all this death talk, I'm like, I am hungry. Okay. Anyway, so then, what would you, even with all of the weirdness, what would you say is your favorite part of the writing process? Is it the research, the daydreaming, the plotting? If you're a plotter,
I am more of a plotter now than I ever have been. I think that comes in when writing series. When I wrote Bless Your Heart, the first book in the series, I didn't know if it was going to be a series or a standalone or a two-parter. Or, you didn't there's a lot of other things besides just the writer that go into those decisions and those thinkings, that you don't think about, like, what does the publisher want to do? What are, how long is it going to take? So I do a lot more plotting than I used to. I am still not super great at it. I plot in chunks. So it's like, I know the first act and I know the beginning and the end. And then I kind of have to piece it together, as I'm working through. But what do you do?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that I'm kind of the same way, where as long as I know where I'm going, then I will find my way there. I will take a meandering, horrific path, but I will get there eventually in the end. So I totally get that. And that kind of answers my next question about writing a series a little bit. Like, there's a lot of people that go into that decision, but once that decision is made, what kind of questions do you have to answer before you can think about the next book?
I think it's what is the whole story, and then what are like the milestone stories that you take to get there. So where is Luna at the end? Where is Ducey at the end? Where is everybody at? Where's the end of their specific journey lead them? Because if I know they need to get from A to B, then I can work how they're going, and then I see everyone's path gets kind of stacked together. So I think I'm not a mystery writer like by naturally. I'm kind of a horror writer. I have a linear path, but mysteries is like, you got to kind of keep things moving and throw some red herrings and and it's tricky. It's a super tricky skill set to get. I've discovered when I'm writing, there's seeds that I've planted, is what I always call them. I planted the seed that I didn't know I was doing, and it gives me a stitch later to pull. Luckily, those things tend to happen by lucky accident lately, but I am trying to be more intentional about them. But I think you have to see the big picture and kind of know where things are in the very, very end, and then bite the elephant one bite at a time type thing.
Oh, I love that. My critique partner and I throw that back at each other all the time. How do you eat an elephant whenever we're bitching at each other? Oh, sorry.
Somebody needs to put a bleep button on Katrina.
Bleep. I was being so good. I was being so good.
Me too. I'm so proud of us.
but yes, when we are complaining to each other about how difficult something is, and I very selfishly asked that question about the series because I am currently writing a PI mystery series. I am also not a mystery writer by any stretch of the imagination. I gave it away right in the beginning. It didn't, so I'm really bad. But what will potentially be a series, maybe. So I will maybe one day pick your brain.
Sure.
About what you've done.
I'll be here for elephant conversations. I mean, whatever I can give you in the meantime.
So we've talked a lot about the Evanses, but I'm also very excited about your next standalone, Dollface, which sounds so cool. So it's pitched as Barbie meets Scream, which is awesome with more 90s nostalgia. Makes me super happy. How has writing, they're both set in a similar time period. So how has writing this book been different from writing the Evanses? And if you want to tell us a little bit more about it too within that question.
Let me tell you. So the Evans world is so different. This Dollface is one of these books that like has worked me really hard. Whereas Another Fine Mess was super easy for me. Um, I don't know. I don't know what the deal is with my brain, but Another Fine Mess, it was so cathartic and so wonderful. I got to hang out with my grandmothers and I got to go back to my hometown and see my friends. And so I was so excited to be with them again that the more time I get to spend there, I love it and I'm happy. And it just feels very much like home. When I started writing Dollface, it likewise is very inspired by things in my life, and but it's more of my adult life. So Dollface begins in 1998. With a childhood memory. My mother is furious with me, by the way, because what I wrote in the prologue of Dollface is like it's like as exactly real as Bless Your Heart is real kind of thing. And my mom was like, "You're gonna make people think I did this and this." I'm like, no one's gonna think that, Mom. You're fine.
I am
like,
now.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, the more you protest, the more I'm writing. But no, I put so much of myself and my own stories into my work because that's where I have the best memories and the best vision and able to visualize things. But Dollface was hard. It started in 98 and then actually moves into the modern day, but it keeps a lot of that nostalgia tracking through of the books because, all the things we talked about already. But I spent 4 years living in suburban New Jersey. I'm a professor at Rutgers, so kind of where I started my tenure there. And I moved into this super uppity suburb and I thought, oh my God, I don't belong here. Like I'm this weird little like Southern girl. And then I move in this super uppity area with these super high functioning, like Wonder Women. And I'm just like, I don't know, my kid probably has two socks on. I don't know. Trying to do mom and I thought I'm never going to make friends here. I'm never going to fit in with this crowd. I felt just completely out of my area. And they ended up being probably 4 of the best years of my life. I made wonderful lifelong friends. I loved my uppity suburban neighborhood. I TP'd a lot of trees in that neighborhood over the years. I'm the horror writer that lives down the road, which I wasn't writing at the time. This was a long time ago, but I put so much of that into myself. So they're 2 very different worlds for me, but I think it's me writing. So hopefully they have the same kind of voice and the same humor, the same balance of, gory and gleeful, maybe.
I love that description. That is amazing. Trademark that. That's perfect.
I know. It's a little tick. But yeah, so Dollface was pitched as Barbie meets Scream with a nostalgic 90s twist, and it will be out in February from St. Martin's Minotaur.
I can't wait. It sounds so amazing. It really, really does. So you talked a little bit about, I'm going off script now just because I'm very excited about this book. You talked a little bit about the prep that you did for Another Fine Mess with treadmill crying and watching 90s movies. What kind of, method prep did you do for this one, if at all?
Just as weird, definitely. I mean, I went back online and bought more weird stuff.
Nice.
I don't have it, but in the book, Dollface, which is our villain's name, wears a mask because it's not a good slasher if they don't have a mask. And I had a very specific mask in mind. So I went on eBay until I could find it. I did find it. I do own it. It's back there somewhere. When I started dreaming, it's actually really funny. When I pitched the idea of Bless Your Heart, when the idea of Bless Your Heart started percolating in my brain, I knew I wanted 4 women who were very different and distinct people who had to come together for one goal. It ended up being very Southern set, very family based, very, kind of cozier. And then, but I never kind of felt like I satisfied the craving for this kind of like 4 women doing something together. Like, I don't want family. I want different places in life, different, backgrounds, different. I want more difference than I do similar. But then I couldn't figure it out. I'm like, I know, I mentioned my mom sold Mary Kay all of my childhood. Like, and my mom was she got the car, the whole 9,
She got the car? Wow,
she got
that's impressive.
the car. Yeah, I know. It was like a red Grand Am or something, and she had like the padded pink briefcases, like, I'm sorry, Mom, I love you if you're here. But I really wanted to kind of talk about beauty standards. I wanted to talk about, being forced to fit in molds that you don't feel like you fit in as a woman, as a mother, as a spouse, as a, as a whatever. Um, and I wanted to talk about the body horror of it all.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't really know what that looked like. So I just started writing. And when I pitched it to my editor, I think I pitched it as a little bit more like Death Becomes Her meets Scream. And then as I was writing
Yeah.
it, I realized it moved into a different vein. So I'm
It
still
just got pinker.
it got pinker. Like I have this problem, like I have this kludge of idea, and I just kind of like pick different pieces and make a new project. And then whatever's left over goes, to a new project. But I'm very excited about Dollface. It was so much fun to write. And so much fun again to kind of revisit a very special time in my life with very special people and murder them because that's what I do.
You're just the coolest gal, I gotta say. But isn't it funny how I've interviewed several female horror authors, and it always comes up, and it just blows my mind. Isn't it funny how body horror in women's stories is just women's stories?
Right? It's just like that's my morning. I don't know. I did
Yeah.
that. Yeah. I posted a quote on my Instagram yesterday from Bella Lugosi, who said, women are horror. Like we crave it because we live it every single day,
Mm-hmm.
in our bodies, in our minds, in our experiences. I think you can't really separate the experience of being a woman and the experience of living through body horror. Hoarder's interesting.
No idea. Bing.
One slip. Let's just mark that on the board. But it just goes well together. Because I mean that's the reality of the experience. So Dollface opens with the main protagonist like really inspecting herself. And she's just vicious at her own, self, assessment. And my editor was like, that was brutal. And I'm like, yeah, well, welcome to my mornings. Because as I'm, getting dressed in the morning, I'm like, this didn't used to do this. This is ridiculous. So
Yes.
It's every day. So I don't really even think of it as horror as much as or body horror as much as I just do like, a daily skincare routine.
Yeah. Yeah. If anyone has read Rouge by Mona Awad, it sounds like, and loved it, I feel like Dollface would be the perfect next read for them. That would be cool.
When you're ready to take some revenge on the things you read in other books.
Yes.
You come here. I got you covered.
Yeah, for sure. So my last question is blatantly stolen from V. Schwab from her No Right Way podcast, because I think it is an excellent question for authors with a backlog. She says this so much more eloquently than I will, but you walk into, your ghost walks into a bookstore 100 years from now, and only one of your books is on the shelf. Which one, not that you think it will be, which one do you hope it will be?
I hope it's Bless Your Heart, because I hope that my grandmothers never stop bringing people joy.
I kind of knew that, but I wanted to hear you say that. That's really awesome.
It's unfair because I think Another Fine Mess is maybe a little bit of a, like, I think the story is a little bit more fun in Another Fine Mess. Like, I don't know, maybe it's because it's more recent and I'm still more fresh in my brain, but I love where I got to push and where I got to like see things through and bring, to fruition things that I'd been planning, since day one. But Bless Your Heart was where it started for me. It's where it, where it went back from my grandmother. So it's very special. I think that's the one that I would be most proud of.
That's incredible. Well, those are all of my questions. Thank you, Lindy, for being my guinea pig. I appreciate you letting me poke you a little bit. Yeah. So Robert, if you want to open it up to any audience questions.
Sure. Thanks so much, Katrina. So folks, as we transition to audience questions, now's the time to get them into the Q&A or into the chat box. I had a question for both Lindy and Katrina. Could you both briefly give us your writing origin story? How did you both become authors?
Katrina, why don't you run?
Oh, okay. So I don't know. I feel like I always have been. I remember my very first thing I ever wrote. I was in maybe second or third grade. I don't know. And I had this babysitter named Maria. And I wrote this story about a little girl who this leprechaun comes and wants to like steal her away to this magical place. I was the eldest of 5 children. I wanted to get the heck out of my house. So I wrote a lot of fantasy about going away. But this babysitter, Maria, taught me how to use quotation marks around dialogue. She was maybe like 17 at the time. So, she knew everything as far as I was concerned. But from that point on, I've always had, I tell stories. I've journaled my whole life. I feel like it's just something that, I've always done. It took me a very long time to find an agent, even longer to find an editor for my first book. One of my favorite stories to tell is how, and this was for They Drown Our Daughters. We sent it to an editor, um, got a rejection, as one does. And then almost a year to the day later, she came back and was like, hey, I'm still thinking about this book. Can we make it a ghost story? And that was how I became an author, but also a horror author by accident. So, I mean, that's how I do everything, I feel like, is just by accident. Becoming a PI by accident. I applied for a totally different position and I became this. So I don't know. Anyway, I digress. Lindy.
What about the happiest of accidents, right? Like you look back and I
Yeah,
never thought I would be here, but it's so cool to be here
truly,
today. Did
truly.
you by any chance have like a journal of angsty teenage poetry that you wrote?
100%. I remember I wanted to impress my mother so badly. She won't watch this. I wanted to impress my mother so badly that I wrote this poem, and I remember bringing it to her, and the word maniacal was in it, and I was like maybe sixth grade, I don't know, and she looks at me and she goes, "You couldn't possibly know that word. You didn't write this," and it destroyed me in a way that made the angsty poetry just get more angsty and more like I wanted to find the biggest, longest words I possibly could and put them all into poetry.
I love that for you. Actually, it brought up a whole. I had my first semester in college. I wrote a paper, and I used the word idyllic to describe
Mhm.
like a pasture. And my professor tried to fail me, and he says, "There's no way you knew this word." I'm like, "I know this word, thank you." But I think in terms of my path to writing, I don't know that I can remember a time in my life when I wasn't actively trying to write stories. I mean, the very first adult book I think I ever read was Flowers in the Attic by V.C. Andrews.
Yes. Oh God.
Right, like it takes us back, right? Like
Yes.
I remember snaking that one off Ducey's bookshelves, and she's like, "You can't read that." Meanwhile, she's like playing Misery on the TV, right? And I'm just like,
Yeah.
"This is the best thing ever." But I grew up. I mean, I was definitely one of those girls with the Scholastic Book Fair. Had my shopping list in
Yeah.
place, and I'm like
Yeah.
going down the
Yeah.
Goosebumps aisle, and they're all going in my basket. I still have Goosebumps like all behind me. It's kind of it's no regrets. I love it.
That's awesome.
But I read these incredible stories and I loved them and I wanted to write them too, So I wrote terrible, terrible poetry and I wrote very silly little stories. Um, and then life happened. I grew up. It wasn't really like I wasn't thinking I'm going to be a writer. I was thinking I want to be a professor. That was my biggest goal ever, was to be a professor. And I did meet that goal, but it was along when I was writing, academic papers and book chapters, and I'd done 3 textbooks. I was like, I wonder what it would be like to write fiction. And I started, and it didn't go well, right? Like you have to learn and work that
Yes.
craft.
Yes. Yes.
And I actually did some rom-com stuff before I moved into horror, which is hilarious. And
You know what? I
and
totally buy that. I really do.
par for the course. Yeah, it happened. I did a couple of films and a couple of books, novelizations of the films I did and whatever. And it was just so much fun. I had so much fun in that experience, besides all the headache and suffering that goes along with the writing life. It was just a lot of fun. And I just kept writing, and Bless Your Heart is my debut novel, driven. I always say it was an exorcism of my grandmother's, and really a healing process, and that's completely truthful and honest. And it got picked up really quickly, and I'm just very grateful every day to get to do something I love so much. And I
That is
had the
so
best
cool.
team in the whole world and the best friends in the whole world, so I
That's
could not
awesome.
be luckier.
Okay, so I respectfully, your first book or first thing you wrote that you say was horrible, I guarantee was not worse than the thing that I wrote. The first full-length book I wrote, I tried to write when Twilight first came out, and so it was beat for beat.
Okay, please email that to me immediately following this Zoom call.
I don't even remember what it was called. It was some ridiculous, very like uppity one-word title that I thought was so incredible. And I just looking back at it now or just thinking about it, I'm like, no, you
I
are so dumb.
Oh my God. I did that, but I did that like all through college. I took a poetry class in college and I wrote something called like the Vampire Sonnet. And I pulled it out the other day because the Horror Writers Association Poetry Showcase is on its next call for submissions. And I'm like, I've got something in here. And I found that one and I was like, no, I do not. Like,
Yeah.
no, but I
Yeah.
totally think like the women of horror need to do something one day that's like our angstiest, angsty teen poetry in a collection. Like, wouldn't that just be like, I don't even know what kind of experience that would be, but I choose to believe it would be a lot of fun.
Look, if you ever make that happen, I want in so badly. Don't even know. I feel it deep in my soul.
So,
Need
final
it.
question from me. So, Katrina, what's next for you? And I think you said you were pivoting to maybe mysteries. And where can people learn more about you? Where can they follow you online?
Yeah, so I am currently contract-less. So I'm like, what do the sports people call it? A free agent at the moment. So I'm kind of exploring my mystery side. I am a PI by trade, and so I wrote about a PI mom because why not? And we'll see where it goes from there. We're currently, shopping that around. So fingers crossed it gets picked up somewhere. That would be great. Um, Online, I am only on Instagram because the world is. So I am at author Katrina Monroe on Instagram. If follow me, I'll follow you back. I don't mind.
Excellent. And Lindy, we did hear all about Dollface, so we know it's coming up for you. I don't know if you have anything else you want to share, and then let us know where we can find you online.
Yeah. So yeah, my next novel is Dollface that's coming out in February. And I also have an anthology, a women in horror anthology, of which Katrina is in, called Howl. That will
I
be
didn't
out
know if
in
we were allowed to
November.
say that.
We are allowed to say it.
Okay, I didn't
It's
know.
technically an out, so you heard it here, folks. Heard it here first, friends. But Howl, it's a women in horror anthology about women as wolves, and kind of that whole thing we were talking about earlier with the body horror and the fierce and the ferocity, and I think it's an incredible anthology. I'm very excited about it. That'll
It's
be
fun.
out in November, and then we'll see what happens next. Similarly to Katrina, I am only on Instagram, so I am at Lindy Ryan Writes. And I also have a blog over at Substack, which is the same handle. So that's where I am.
So, folks, let's give Katrina and Lindy a big round of applause for a wonderful conversation. For those watching live, I'll look for an email from me later today with the recording. And please take the feedback survey when you exit the Zoom. I want to thank the I can never say this word, the Collaborative of Public Libraries in Massachusetts, as well as Wellesley Books for sponsoring tonight's event. Thank you so much, Lindy. Thank you so much, Katrina. I wish you continued success with both your careers.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much,
so
Robert.
much.
Thank you, Katrina. So good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks. Bye.